So over the past month, Matt Taibbi and Michael Shellenberger released what they called the CTIL files. So CTIL stands for Cyber Threat Intelligence League. So this was a group that was created during the pandemic by some apparent volunteers and do-gooders with backgrounds in Israeli and American intelligence and security. What could go wrong? Who claimed that they wanted to do volunteer work and pro bono to help hospitals fend off cyber attacks during the pandemic. But of course, their work ended up going way beyond the hospital system and to all sorts of critical infrastructure. And what Matt Taibbi and Michael Shellenberger revealed in their Twitter released files was that this group wasn't just fending off cyber attacks, but instead were going on an active campaign to censor Americans, that they were going above and beyond what we've seen in previous censorship attempts. They were using burner phones and dummy accounts and looking like they were trying to entrap people. Well, we're going to go further into what they were doing here in a little bit. But 3 years before the CTIL files were released, there was another investigation done by an independent journalist who uncovered an even more sinister plot for the CTI League. Leave it to Whitney Webb, one of the best in the business to get to the bottom of things. Now, what she uncovered was that this group was doing way more than attempting to censor people, that they were perhaps trying to get the U.S. into war. So she's going to tell us about what she found out tonight, as well as we're going to be talking about some of the other investigations she's been doing regarding Jeffrey Epstein, RFK Jr., and we might even get into her most recent work on CBDCs. Whitney Webb, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Great to be back, Kim. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's get to the bottom of the CTI League, this Cyber Threat Intelligence League. Michael Shellenberger and Matt Taibbi gave us a little glimpse of what they were up to when it comes to censoring Americans. I never really got into it too much on this show. Maybe I will in the future, or you can explain better about who started this organization. Like, who are these people?
Right. So I started writing about the CTI League, as you mentioned earlier, in 2020. And at that point in time, the lead figurehead of that organization and the leading co-founder, who obviously had the most to do with the organization's existence, was a man named Ohad Zaidenberg, who is a career Israeli intelligence asset, previously a commander in Unit 8200, which is Israel's signal intelligence agency, so sort of like an NSA equivalent. And pretty much his entire career within Israeli intelligence was focused on Iran specifically, conducting cyber attacks against Iran and following Iran as an advanced persistent threat, or APT, and all sorts of things like this. And then he leaves Israeli intelligence formally and begins to work for a company, a cybersecurity company called Clear Sky, that has a lot of enduring affiliations to the Israeli national security apparatus. And there he admits that even in that role, he continues to remain laser focused on Iran. And in that capacity was quoted by a variety of mainstream media outlets in the US mainly, and also in Britain, attributing blame for various hacks and cyber attacks to Iran, where he is cited as the only source. And of course, you get this headline like Iran hacked this, or Iran was responsible for this, but you actually read the article and the only evidence is Ohad Zaidenberg saying things like, yes, it's Iran based on medium to high probability, and because of this person's believed, as in unconfirmed, work history, and it's similar to this previous Iranian group, but he won't say what the overlap was or what the previous Iranian group was. Just like very vague assertions that are then essentially treated as fact by these media outlets, and then we're being told that Iran is consistently attacking us and committing cyber attacks against the United States. And he also did this, for example, at the time in the immediate aftermath of the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the famous Iranian general, when it was being said that Iran was going to retaliate with a cyber attack, and Trump, who was then in office, and Mike Pompeo, his CIA director, said that if Iran did respond with a cyber attack, there would essentially be a hot war between the US and Iran. And then that extremely sensitive time, Ohad Zaidenberg was essentially doing the same thing he's been doing his whole career, essentially, again, and blaming cyber attacks on Iran with little to no evidence at a point where it could, trigger an actual war. And in the context of the CTI League, this is significant because they have partnered or in 2020, they partnered directly with CISA, which is, essentially part of the Department of Homeland Security, responsible for protecting critical infrastructure. And so through their partnership with CISA, they were onboarded onto some of the most critical infrastructure in the United States. So this includes hospitals, and that's how it started. It also expanded to some of the systems of like big pharma. And then from, so major US corporations, and then from there went to things like dams, chemical plants, even nuclear reactors, apparently, but we don't know exactly where they are. We know that they're protecting these types of assets. And the problem here is that anyone can join CTI League as long as they're approved by Ohad Zadenberg and any of the other 3 co-founders, most of whom are affiliated with Microsoft or, US naval intelligence. So you have these
and
four
this is all
individuals.
volunteer, just to like clarify.
Yeah,
these are
and they're
so they're
all
volunteering
doing it for free.
right.
And it's not the US government that's vetting these individuals that are gaining access to the critical infrastructure systems. It's a foreign spy with an obvious agenda. And then these Microsoft guys. And it's important to point out in terms of the censorship story that Microsoft at the same period of time was also involved in creating its own censorship engine under the name of NewsGuard, part of its Defending Democracy program, and also a software that they want installed on all US voting machines called Election Guard, which was being heavily promoted by CISA at the time because the CISA agency under DHS during this period of time was led by Chris Krebs, who was the former head of cybersecurity for Microsoft. So you have a former Microsoft executive bringing in CTI League that involved these 2 Microsoft figures, along with Ohad Zadenberg, and allowing those figures who were, not affiliated, not part of the government, not elected, right? And one of whom isn't even an American citizen, to decide who gets access to US critical infrastructure. Very risky, if you ask me. And this is particularly troubling when you consider the Israeli intelligence connection here, because it's been admitted for years that, Israeli intelligence has a very admitted plan for regime change in Iran. And part of this involves manipulating how the U.S., U.S. policy with respect to Iran and pushing the U.S. To supercharge those efforts so Israel doesn't have to get its hands dirty. And this has essentially been admitted by former Mossad directors like Meir Dagan, who have said that the U.S. would need to strike Iran first and not Israel, for example, in the event that Israel wants to launch a regional war with Iran. And so you have this situation now where it's very possible that the current conflict between Israel and Gaza could expand into a regional war. And if Israel feels overwhelmed, how would they prompt the U.S. to get involved? When you look at incidents in the past, like the USS Liberty, and then you further consider that you have an individual like Ohad Zadenberg, who has allowed unknown people to access critical infrastructure in the United States, and that cyber attacks would be treated as hacks. And you also have the head of DHS saying that get ready for big attacks on critical infrastructure, killware, he calls it, and all sorts of things like that. It's definitely something to watch out for. And I think people should be very wary of this, particularly when it comes to attribution for these hacks and these cyber attacks, because in the case of Ohad Zadenberg, that's essentially the norm in the industry when it comes to attributing blame to nation states. So you have, Odin Haydenberg and Ohad Zadenberg and Clear Sky not really having any real evidence, only this vague assertions, right? But that's also very common in other cases. For example, this recent story about the Chinese military infiltrating American networks. The source for that was a company called Recorded Future, essentially the only source in there that was actually attributing, this particular incident to China. And they were created by with InQtel funding, which is the CIA. So are we going to just trust these intelligence fronts to tell us who hacked who? I think, if war is on the line, there should be we should, demand some actual evidence or be skeptical.
Right.
But I think they're hopeful that people just read the headlines and get outraged. Oh, we're under attack, and willingly, lend their support to a major war, which could balloon and expand into World War III, which I think, Americans should be cognizant that it's not exactly the 1940s anymore, and that America doesn't necessarily have the superiority militarily that it used to, and that World War III will definitely have major consequences for the American homeland in comparison to the previous two world wars. So I think it's very important that people are skeptical here, and I don't think it makes sense for me personally. My view is that I don't think Americans should go to die for the benefit of a foreign power, specifically one that backed people like Jeffrey Epstein and has been one of the most aggressive espionage targets targeting the U.S. government. And that's something revealed by the, Edward Snowden leaks, that it was Russia, China, and Israel that were the most aggressive cyber attackers of U.S. systems. And they get billions of dollars in aid from the U.S. government. So I don't really think it's necessary to send people to fight their war with Iran.
You said two of them are from Microsoft. Two from Microsoft, yes. One from Israeli intelligence. He's not even an American citizen. And then the fourth guy was like a DOD guy, right?
He's from Okta, which is a U.S. government contractor.
Okay.
With the case of hospitals, it's kind of unsettling because literally at the time this Cyber Justice League was created, HHS policy in the U.S. defunded hospital cybersecurity budgets pretty much across the board. And then there was this uptick in cyber threats during COVID, and these claims about a cyber pandemic and all of this going on. And so the U.S. government policy left them defenseless at this exact time. And then in comes writing this particular group saying, oh, well, we'll help, and for free. You don't have to pay us. Right. So maybe if HHS hadn't changed that policy, not as many hospitals would have willingly accepted the help of the CTI League.
Okay, so then what did Taibbi and Schellenberger, what did they uncover? Because they just focused on the censorship stuff, which has really been what they've been focusing on, and not so much on the intelligence guys, but that was more of the Microsoft guys, right? That were behind more of the censorship stuff? Or was it all?
Yeah, and there was a particular figure named Sarah Jane Terp that was also, who I also mentioned in my report, that was leading a lot of this misinformation policy. And then I believe they broached this issue of basically these policies that were being incubated by these actors to essentially treat spreading alleged misinformation as cyber crime. And this is something that goes even beyond the CTI League. Some of my past work, I think from a couple of years ago, talking about the World Economic Forum Partnership Against Cybercrime, also seeks to treat the alleged or the publication of alleged misinformation as cyber criminality. And this particular partnership at the World Economic Forum includes the U.S. Secret Service and the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice. So that's definitely something to pay attention to as well, because some of the things in some of their white papers they've said should be done to tackle misinformation include seizing people's domains and attacking their finances and all of this. And it's very similar to what has been put out by Schellenberger and Taibbi more recently. But this is something that goes beyond the CTI League and directly involves, U.S. law enforcement.
So you've got these Microsoft guys who work for Bill Gates. Bill Gates, who clearly during the pandemic had an agenda, right? We saw him have a major agenda when it came to vaccines. And we also have seen him cozy with Jeffrey Epstein, wanting to get a Nobel Prize, I think is that he was asking Jeffrey Epstein, who apparently had enough power to be able to swing something like that, had enough connections and power, blackmail on people. So you've got Bill Gates cozy with Jeffrey Epstein. You've got this Israeli intelligence. Was he Mossad specifically, or some other aspect of Israeli intelligence? Or are they?
So as far as Epstein's intelligence ties go, I wrote a 1,000-page book trying to delineate this. So it's kind of complex. It obviously involves Israel. It also has aspects of American intelligence. It's really this nexus that became very visible during Iran-Contra, where you have essentially, I guess to sort of simplify the explanation, sort of an Israeli deep state teaming up with an American deep state, and that they frequently collaborate and advance their own agenda. And they're very much like a transnational organization that has no loyalty to either the American people or the Israeli people. They essentially operate as organized crime. So essentially Epstein worked for them.
Right.
And
but I'm saying
obviously there's affiliations with Israeli politicians and Israeli intelligence figures.
The guy that worked for CTI League, the Israeli, was he Mossad?
He was Unit 8200, which is like the NSA equivalent of Israel.
Okay. So you've got this guy. You've got a couple guys working for Bill Gates. You've got Bill Gates connected to Jeffrey Epstein, Epstein connected to Mossad and American intelligence. And then you've got this American intelligence guy also in this group. I mean, look, like a lot of us don't want to be conspiracy theorists, but it's hard to not look at what clearly is the obvious. And then you've got these guys that are saying, oh, we're going to do it on a volunteer basis, but they're clearly acting for the interest of whoever they actually really work for.